I was seated behind a pillar at my sister's wedding. Everyone pretended I wasn't family. Then, a stranger sat beside me and said, "Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date." When he stood to speak, everyone turned, and my sister stopped smiling. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The wedding was a $1,500,000 performance. I wasn't a guest. I was a ghost. The Monterey cliffside was my masterpiece, a landscape of salt-resistant stone and native flora that I had spent 6 months perfecting. I knew every curve of the land because I had drawn it. But today, the air didn't smell like the sea. It smelled like $1,500,000 of stolen credit. My sister, Taylor, stood at the center of the oceanfront terrace, draped in ivory silk that cost more than my entire annual rent, accepting praise for the magnificent grounds she claimed to have designed herself. "It is all about vision," she told a group of wide-eyed socialites, her voice light and practiced. "I wanted a space that breathes." She didn't mention the hundreds of hours I had spent in the dirt. She didn't mention that I was the one who corrected her husband Aaron's structural errors when the North Terrace started to slide into the ocean. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for years, providing the raw talent and the labor, while they took the dividends and the glory. I was the ghostwriter of their success, the architect of their shadows. My mother, Patricia, was the chief accountant of this emotional fraud. I remember the exact moment. The balance sheet of our relationship hit zero. 2 months before the wedding, I had walked into her house with a portfolio. It was my design for the city's new public park, a project worth $500,000 in consulting fees alone. It was my legacy, my bridge to a future, where I wasn't just Emily, the one who works with dirt. I had left the blueprints on the dining table, hoping for a single moment of recognition. When I returned from the kitchen, Patricia was sweeping my life's work into a large black trash bag. She didn't even look up to see the horror on my face. "Emily, we need the table space," she said, her voice clinical and devoid of warmth. "Taylor's wedding invitations are arriving this afternoon. We simply can't have this clutter taking up room where the real celebration belongs." I watched 3 months of my soul disappear into the plastic. I didn't cry. I didn't beg her to stop. I just stood there, realizing that my mother didn't see a career. She saw an inconvenience. She patted my hand, a gesture that felt like a cold contract being signed. "Be realistic, dear," Patricia added. "You design gardens for people who can't afford to hire your sister. Taylor is marrying into an empire. That is the only future this family has. You don't have a future in these little hobbies." Looking at the back of the pillar now, I realized that my love for them had been a subscription they'd overdrafted for decades. This wasn't a family. It was a bad investment. I opened my bag and felt the cool metal of my laptop. Beside the laptop lay the blueprints. I had snatched them back from the trash bag when Patricia's back was turned, the paper still smelling of the coffee grounds she'd tried to bury them in. She thought she'd discarded my career. She'd only discarded a plastic bag. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was an audit. I wasn't here to be a sister anymore. I was here to close the account. The stranger beside me, Ethan, shifted slightly, his expensive suit rustling. He was the only thing in this room that didn't feel like a fabrication. He saw the audit happening in my eyes and gave a sharp, knowing nod. The silence between Ethan and me was broken not by an apology, but by the sharp click of designer heels. Taylor appeared, her face a mask of frantic perfection. She didn't look at my dress or the stranger sitting beside me. She looked through me, as if I were a smudge on her otherwise spotless window. "Emily, finally," she hissed, her voice a low vibration of command. One of the serving staff walked out. "The catering manager is spiraling. Since you're just sitting here in the dark anyway, I need you in the kitchen. Now, I looked at the black pillar, then at the ivory silk of her gown. My mother, Patricia, materialized behind her like a debt collector, eyes scanning the room to ensure no one was watching this tawdry exchange. She's right, dear, Patricia added. Nobody can see you back here. You're practically invisible. Instead of brooding, you should be doing something for your sister. It's the least you can do for the family. I felt the weight of 27 years of psychological architecture pressing down on my chest. I had lived in a prison without bars for so long that I had forgotten the doors didn't even have locks. This was the invisible chain of the survivor, a state of mind where survival is often mistaken for weakness. It is built on a mechanism called learned helplessness. When you are conditioned to believe your value is strictly tied to your utility to others, you stop looking for the exits because you've been told they are permanently sealed. I wasn't staying because I was weak. I was staying because I had been trained to survive within the walls they built. I stood up, my joints feeling like rusted machinery. I didn't argue. I didn't point out that I was the architect who had planned the very landscape beneath us. I followed them into the industrial coldness of the kitchen. Taylor handed me a heavy black linen apron. "Tie it tight," she commanded, "and stay out of the sightlines of the Bennett Health executives. We have an image to maintain, and a dramatic, embittered sister isn't part of the brand." I tied the apron. I felt the rough fabric against my skin, a stark contrast to the $500 dress I had bought for a sister who wanted me to be a shadow. This wasn't a family dynamic. It was a hostile takeover of my identity. I was paying the interest on a debt of gratitude I never actually signed for. As I carried a tray of $100 appetizers back into the ballroom, I watched them. Patricia was laughing with a senator. Taylor was glowing under the spotlight. They looked powerful, but it was a leveraged power. They were high-end tenants in a house built on my silence. But as I caught Ethan's eye from across the room, I realized the lease was up. The audit was about to begin. I moved through the clusters of elite guests, the black linen apron acting as a cloak of invisibility. To these people, I was just a moving piece of furniture, a tray of canapes on legs. I stood near the edge of the stage as Taylor rose, her crystal glass catching the light of the $10,000 chandeliers. Beside her, Aaron smiled, a mask of confidence that appeared far more solid than his bank account actually was. "To the future," Aaron announced, his voice booming with the unearned authority of a man living on a leveraged dream. "To the Monterey Heights development, the cornerstone of our new empire." The room erupted in applause, and I watched my mother, Patricia, in the front row. She was beaming, her laughter sharp and hollow, as she leaned over to a woman dripping in diamonds. "Aaron is a visionary," she whispered, ensuring her voice carried to the surrounding tables. "My Taylor always knew how to pick a winner. Bennett Health is lucky to have him as a partner. This wedding is just the beginning of their reign." I watched the ripple of admiration through the crowd and realized I was witnessing a masterclass in the illusion of power from an empty wallet. There is a cold, psychological divide between having and being. Taylor and Aaron were obsessed with having the $1,500,000 wedding, the $500,000 contract, the prestige. But they had no being. Their entire identity was a lease luxury, a suit of armor with no person inside. They were high-end squatters in the world of the elite, pretending their borrowed status was a birthright. When your power is rented through debt, and your success is built on stolen talent, you don't actually own your life. You are just an actor in a high-budget commercial for a product that doesn't exist. I looked at Aaron's hands as he raised his glass. They were steady, but I knew those hands had signed documents that were built on a foundation of my work and his lies. I adjusted the silver tray, the cold metal digging into my palm through the black apron. Patricia caught my eye for a fleeting second and gestured impatiently toward an empty glass at a nearby table. She didn't see a daughter. She saw a service deficiency. I didn't feel the old sting of rejection. I felt a clinical clarity. They thought they were the main event, But they were just the opening act for their own inevitable audit. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff I had designed, and they were about to find out exactly how deep the fall would be. The applause for Aaron was still echoing when Ethan stood up. He didn't ask for permission to speak. He moved with the quiet, crushing confidence of a man who owned the building and the ground beneath it. The room fell into a sudden, vacuum-like silence. Taylor and Aaron looked confused, their smiles flickering like dying light bulbs as Ethan reached the center of the spotlight. "It is a beautiful ceremony," Ethan began, his voice calm, steady, and carrying the weight of a heavy hammer. "But, as the principal investor of Bennett Health Solutions and the majority shareholder holding 51% of Aaron's development firm, I believe it is time for a more realistic update on the future of this venture." I saw Aaron's face turn from a healthy tan to a sickly, greyish white in a matter of seconds. Patricia's glass stopped halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting between Ethan and her son-in-law. The illusion of their independent empire was shattered by a single sentence from the man who had been relegated to the back row. Ethan looked directly at me, still standing near the kitchen entrance in my black linen apron. "Success is rarely a solo endeavor," he continued, his gaze never wavering. "The Monterey project only exists because of the strategic vision of one specific architect, a person whose brilliance is the only reason I agreed to sign a $500,000 check in the first place." He gestured toward me. Every head in the ballroom turned in a synchronized wave of shock. The photographers, the senators, the socialites, they all stared at the waitress with the silver tray. The invisible one was suddenly the only person in the room who mattered. "I would like to introduce you all to Emily," Ethan said, his voice ringing with a clear, clinical authority that brooked no argument. "She isn't just a guest here tonight. She is the lead strategic consultant for the entire Monterey Heights initiative. In fact, under the terms of our legally binding partnership agreement, she is the only person with the power to veto any aspect of the design or development. Without her final approval and signature, this empire Aaron mentioned doesn't even have a permit to dig a hole." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a house of cards, collapsing in slow motion. Taylor stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with a mixture of pure horror and the slow realization of her own catastrophic mistake. She had spent the last hour treating the woman who held the keys to her future like a piece of service equipment. Patricia looked as though she had been struck. My value was no longer a matter of maternal preference or family hierarchy. It was a contractual reality. I was the person they had tried to erase, and now I was the only person who could determine whether they would rise or fall. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, letting the cold, hard facts of the situation settle over them like a shroud. For years, I had been the silent investor in their lives, but the accounts were finally being settled. Ethan didn't stop at the revelation of my professional status. He gave a sharp signal toward the back of the room, and a man in a charcoal grey suit stepped forward, holding a sleek black tablet. I recognized him immediately as Marcus, a high-stakes attorney who had been reviewing my files for weeks. The room remained in a state of suspended animation as Marcus approached the stage. This wasn't just a business dispute anymore. The air had turned clinical, like an audit about to uncover a terminal error. Marcus didn't look at the guests. He looked only at the legal documents on his screen, his expression as cold as the sea spray hitting the cliffs outside. "I am here representing Emily regarding systematic fraud. We filed our findings with the district attorney this morning, and a judge has already issued an arrest warrant for Aaron on charges of grand theft and identity fraud," Marcus announced, his voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "During our due diligence for the Monterey Heights project, we discovered that several critical environmental permits were submitted with Emily's signature. Permits that were used to secure a $500,000 development loan." I watched Aaron's face lose what little color remained. He looked toward the exit, his once confident posture replaced by the frantic energy of a cornered animal. "There's only one problem," Marcus continued, tapping a button on his tablet to project an image onto the large screens Taylor had installed to show her childhood photos. Instead of a smiling bride, the guests saw a side-by-side comparison of my actual signature and a forged version found on the project documents. My client never signed these papers. She had already flagged the North Terrace as structurally unsound and environmentally hazardous. To bypass her veto, Aaron forged her name on government documents. The discovery hit the room like a physical explosion. This wasn't just about Taylor's ego or Patricia's favoritism. It was about a crime, with a $500,000 price tag. The realization that their empire was built on a felony effectively removed any path to redemption for them. Taylor grabbed Aaron's arm, her fingers digging into his expensive suit. "Aaron, tell them it's a mistake," she pleaded. But her voice was a thin, high-pitched whimper that lacked any real conviction. Aaron said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the two men in uniform who had just appeared at the ballroom entrance. The sight of handcuffs, in a room decorated with $50,000 worth of white roses, was the ultimate kill shot for their reputation. Cops at a $1 million wedding created a viral moment that the socialites and photographers would be talking about for decades. I looked at my mother. Patricia was staring at the screen, at the undeniable proof that her visionary son-in-law was a common fraudster, and her golden daughter was a co-conspirator in a sinking ship. The facade of family unity didn't just crack, it disintegrated. I didn't feel a drop of sadness. I rubbed my eyes, not to wipe away tears, but to clear my vision. This wasn't a family tragedy. It was a balance sheet, finally coming into perfect, lethal alignment. The white roses in the ballroom seemed to wilt under the harsh glare of the projector. Taylor's hand dropped from Aaron's arm as the first set of handcuffs clicked into place. The sound was small, but in the absolute silence of the room, it was a gunshot. My mother, Patricia, stumbled toward me, her champagne-colored gown trailing like a flag of surrender. "Emily, please," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in my life. "Think about what you are doing. This is your sister's wedding. We are a family. You are destroying everything we've built over one little disagreement." I looked at her, and then at Taylor, who had collapsed onto the stage, her ivory silk dress staining as it touched the floor. The power flip was happening right in front of me. A week ago, I might have felt the old urge to fix things, to stabilize the family dynamic at my own expense. But looking at them now, I didn't see people I loved. I saw bad assets on a balance sheet that had finally been audited. "Family?" I asked, my voice as cold and clinical as a bank teller's. A family doesn't seat their daughter behind a pillar. A family doesn't veil their child's work as a hobby, while stealing their professional reputation to secure loans for a fraud. You didn't treat me like family. You treated me like a line of credit. You never intended to repay. Taylor looked up at me through smeared mascara, her face a mask of desperation. "Emily, stop the attorney. Tell Ethan to drop the charges. We can fix the documents. We can give you the credit you want. Just don't let them take Aaron away." I reached back and untied the strings of the heavy black linen apron Taylor had forced me to wear. I stepped forward and draped the rough fabric over her trembling shoulders. "I'm just a dramatic, embittered girl, remember?" I said, leaning in close so only she could hear my cold finality. "I'm not qualified to handle million-dollar numbers or corporate legalities. I'm just sitting in the dark, doing what is best for the family. And right now, what is best is for this audit to reach its natural conclusion." Patricia tried to grab my hand, her eyes red with performative tears. "You can't just walk away. We are your blood. You share my DNA, Patricia," I replied, stepping out of her reach. "But the subscription for my silence has expired. I've liquidated my interest in this family. You can keep the $1,500,000 party. I'm taking my dignity." I turned my back on the stage, the crying, and the flashing lights. As Ethan joined me at the exit, I didn't look back once. The accounts were closed. The case was resolved with clinical efficiency. Aaron was sentenced for forgery and fraud, his empire liquidated to pay off creditors, and the $500,000 restitution he owed me. Taylor and Patricia lost the Monterey house, a bad asset they could no longer leverage. I didn't celebrate their bankruptcy. I simply recorded it as a zero balance in a ledger I no longer needed to carry. I used the settlement and my $250,000 annual income to purchase the very cliffside land Aaron had tried to steal. I didn't build a fortress of ivory, silk, or gold chandeliers. I built the public park from the blueprints Patricia had once thrown into the trash. This was the transition from the justice of the past to the justice of the sower. Most people think justice is about a hammer coming down, about seeing the villains bleed. But that is the justice of the rearview mirror. True justice is the justice of the sower, focusing on the seeds you plant for the future. By building something beautiful and permanent, I made Taylor's petty cruelty feel microscopic. Her attempts to dim my light didn't just fail. They became irrelevant footnotes in a much larger, greener story. Everything stayed silent for days after the final papers were signed. But in my head, their voices had finally stopped echoing. I stopped looking for the exits because I had finally realized I was the one who designed the doors. Now, I wake up to the sound of the ocean, not the noise of their expectations. Ethan is there, a partner who sees the architect, not just the asset. I opened my old family spreadsheet one last time, stared at the years of emotional debt, and hit delete. That night, for the first time in 27 years, I slept through until morning. No guilt, no noise, just the peace of a balanced account. If you believe that justice eventually finds its way to those who plant the right seeds, please share this and subscribe to the channel to support more journeys of quiet, powerful reclamation.